to solve the greatest mystery in the universe is to solve all other mysteries. The purpose of this series is to ask, what is that greatest mystery, and can it be solved? The mystery has to do with a titanic struggle between two Hercules, the effects of which will reach to every person on the globe, those born in the past, those living now, and those to be born in the future. When I was a very small boy with a much older brother, we would go to watch wrestling matches. I think it was Rushcutters Bay, Sydney. As I got older, I moved to the movies, and the heroes were frequently great boxers. But I'm going to speak with you today about a much greater wrestling match, a much greater boxing match than anything you have ever heard of before. It concerns not two people, but two conflicting passions in the one person. And that person, the greatest person in the universe, the God-man, who once said, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall never pass away." And he told us something even more important. He said, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. This man has just dined with 12 disciples. It was a happy and yet also a sad occasion. The master, always cheerful, had a tinge of sadness about all that he said and did at the supper. For example, he said all of them were going to run away from him and forsake him that very night. And he said one of them would betray him and another one would deny him. What's good about that? Nevertheless, they sang a wonderful Jewish hymn, the Hallel, from the Psalms. And then they took off down the steep ascent, the descent from Jerusalem, down to where there was a crossing of the brook Kedron. Now, Kedron is a word that means dark waters. And what we're going to think about for a while is of the essence of darkness. On the way, they talk cheerfully. Then Christ utters a very majestic prayer for all his followers, present and future. Then they cross the little bridge over Kedron, find themselves at the foot of the Mount of Olives and on the edge of the Garden of Gethsemane. Here he leaves 8 of his disciples with the admonition, watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. And he takes 3 of them, because Judas is missing, takes 3 of them into the innermost recesses of the garden, and he leaves them by about a stone's throw. And then what a transformation! What a horrible change! What a surprising difference in their master. he falls prostrate to the ground. And the sleepy disciples hear moans and groans, and they remember that just before he left them, he said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death." And now he's praying with strong cries and tears. And as he prays more earnestly, his body exudes bloody sweat. This is too much for the disciples. They can't stand the sight. And soon they're asleep. But he prays, and his prayer is always the same. And the first word of his prayer is a word that's not found in any of the literature of his race. It's the word Abba, which to a child meant daddy, father, daddy. All things are possible to you. If it be possible, permit that this cup may pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. He wants sympathy. He's just as much man as though not at all God. But he's just as much God as though not at all man. But as man, he must fight this conflict. And there are two passions within him. He wants to redeem the world, but he's afraid. He's afraid of the price that it may mean separation from his Father forever and ever. That's the dread darkness that falls on the Lord of glory. If he goes through with his plan, does it mean he'll never see heaven again, never be at home again, never rejoice in his Father's company and the Spirit's fellowship? He runs to his disciples for sympathy, but they're asleep. He notices Peter in the foreground. He says, "Peter, couldn't you watch with me 1 hour?" But they sleep on. He returns and prays the same prayer. But he makes the decision. And when he makes the decision, he is still exuding bloody sweat. But he runs to his disciples the second time, and again they're asleep. He says, making an excuse for them, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Then he returns and tells his heavenly Father his decision is made. Whatever it costs, he will go through the dark night, the dark waters of trial, and redeem the world. And then there's a flash of light, and a mysterious being from heaven, an angel, is by his side, cradling his head and whispering to him. And when Christ arises to go to his disciples for the third time, there's no sign of the struggle. We have wondered how his calm became a tempest. We've wondered how his peace could degenerate into an awful agony. But now he's calm again. He is himself again. And he says to the disciples, "Sleep on now, take your rest." But suddenly he hears the clanging of weapons. There are hundreds of men in the distance about to burst through the gloom. And there are lanterns, lights, and much talk. So he says to the disciples, "Rise up, let us be going. He that betrays me is at hand." Now I want to remind you that 3 years before, Christ had fought the satanic leader of all evil, the devil. Matthew 4 records it. But in the record of that struggle, there's not a syllable of pain, of agony, not even of strain. He seems to have no difficulty in overcoming his enemy. Charles Spurgeon says a very interesting thing about Christ. He said the man of sorrows and acquainted with grief was still the happiest man in the world. He had a peace nothing could disturb. He had a great joy. He promised he'd leave his peace as a legacy to his disciples. But why the transformation in Gethsemane? Why is the happiest man in the world sweating blood, great crying and tears, clutching at the damp earth as though he's being separated from above? Why? Why? And what's the mystery of this man Judas, who's leading 500 Roman soldiers and priests and elders of the temple and a rabble? This man is to become the most hated man in the world. And yet, he answers another mystery. Millions in the world believe in the mystery of universalism, that Hitlers and Stalins and Mao Zedongs, and doesn't matter how bad a person is, they'll eventually be saved. That's universalism. But Christ had said about Judas, it were better that this man was never born. So Judas, the most hated man of history, also answers a worldwide theory that is false, that we know as universalism.